Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. It's episode 2622 of The Tom Woods Show. And Kelley, I think you've been on the show with me before, but I think it's been quite a while. So it is...
Long time.
Yeah. So when I say welcome back, I mean, it's like the whole world is different from the last time you were here with me.
Sure.
You are senior advisor at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, I think may be the full title, and you're editorial director of the publication Responsible Statecraft. So I think I get that right. I do want to say very briefly, as I said a couple of episodes ago, I realize that my background here is not what people have come to expect. I look like I'm in like a Senegalese prison and I'm about to dictate a ransom note or something, but this is what New York hotel rooms look like. You know, they're barren and terrible. So, all right. So, but that's
and you're
neither.
paying for the privilege too.
Exactly. The money is going for the privilege to be in this great city at this moment. Well, let's talk about some things that have been going on relating to foreign policy, and I want to start with an issue from last week involving a Daniel Davis, and I have to admit, I now realize I should have known about him. I should have known who he was. And it's my fault that I didn't. But he is, let's say, the latest example of somebody who had opinions that are on foreign policy that are entirely defensible, that I myself would defend, but that are considered absolutely beyond the pale by the bipartisan foreign policy establishment, whose death, rumors of whose death are greatly exaggerated, which is still very, very much a presence in American life. And he was up for consideration to work alongside or under Tulsi Gabbard, and that was scrapped when apparently Laura Loomer and Mark Levin started publicizing his unacceptable views, which are not, I think by a normal person, unacceptable at all. Do you know him?
Yes. I know him because back in 2009, he had come out and he was active duty Army Lieutenant Colonel at the time. And here comes this guy who writes an article for Armed Forces Journal, basically saying that he just got back from Afghanistan and the generals are lying to you. They're testifying on Capitol Hill that victory is right around the corner, that a few more troops and more resources and more time for training will do the trick. He comes back from Afghanistan. He says, I didn't see a scintilla of proof of that. And it is my job, as someone who swore an oath to the Constitution, to tell the truth. And that's what our generals should be doing. And he had sent a classified report to Congress. So he went through proper channels. He briefed Congress on what he saw. He was there on an inspection tour, and had served in the first Persian Gulf War. So this is a guy who'd been around the block and close to retirement, and had been a loyal soldier and every definition of. But he came back and he says, I just can't believe what our senior officers are telling us. And then he went and he published this article. And I said, wow, I love these guys, these truth tellers. As a journalist who had been covering the war, I'd been very critical of it. I'd been writing for antiwar.com and the American Conservative since 2007. These guys were gold because they were coming from the inside. They were struggling with what they saw in the hypocrisy, in many cases, corruption, the politicization of the senior officer corps. And he was willing to put his career on the line to tell the truth. And it caused all sorts of mayhem. And I think, it was people like Danny Davis who allowed other people to come forward, allowed other people who had recently been retired, for example, a lot of lieutenant colonels out there who basically said the same thing. but you needed people on the inside to take that first brave step. And he retired, and he absolutely paid for it. There was no cushy contractor job for him afterwards. There were no boards of directors that he was asked to sit on. He certainly didn't get a job, working for Raytheon or Booz Allen or any of that. And he was kind of a pariah among the insular military community for what he had said. But much like Doug McGregor, who I believe you're familiar with, another Persian Gulf I veteran colonel, he decided that he is going to spend all of his time and energy basically trying to change the system. And so this was in 2009, and I've kept in touch with him. He's written many good articles. I've interviewed him many times over the years. He has a podcast now. He's at Defense Priorities, which is a right-leaning realist foreign policy organization that is dedicated to righting the wrongs of our national security and foreign policy orthodoxies here in Washington. And this was the easiest column I ever wrote, is writing about how he was smeared out of this job, because you're absolutely right. He's not outside the mainstream. If anything, he's closer to where the conservative base is today on foreign policy than any of the neocons and any of these war party denizens are. He's not about denigrating the military. He's very proud. He's a conservative. He's a Christian conservative. He's just seen how corrupted the institution has gotten because of our failed wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the continuing policies that we have in Ukraine and Gaza. And he's been very vocal about it. And guess what? That ended up being his demise in this job, because he was such a truth teller, particularly on Gaza and Iran, that these pro-Israel outlets decided they were going to smear him. And sadly, it worked.
So it was definitely that, which was considered, because these people live in a bubble.
Yeah,
this is considered to be crazy talk. No one thinks this way. Actually, they do. A lot of people think this way. Like a lot of perfectly normal people think this way. But then beyond that, apparently he was on with Colonel McGregor, who's been on my show too. And apparently Colonel McGregor was talking and saying that it's wrong to think of China as an enemy, and he was listing places we should not think of as enemies. And the criticism of Daniel Davis was that he sat there nodding. He was supposed to interrupt and say, "No, I'm pretty sure I read in the New York Times that country's an enemy." I mean, to me, it'd be refreshing to have one person somewhere in the foreign policy establishment who isn't a China hawk. Like even the best people we run into on foreign policy, when it comes to China, well, we have to make an exception for China. Why? Nobody knows why, because, well, we just do, because everybody does. And I don't go for that. I think there's excellent reason not to have this crazy posture toward China. But so that was not allowed, absolutely not allowed, because they never heard anybody take that kind of position.
Yeah. And, I go back to the 2016 campaign when Trump came out and he said that Iraq was a failure. And he stood on the debate stage with his fellow Republicans that include Jeb Bush. And he basically called George W. Bush a liar and said the Iraq war was a failure, and that if he was president, he's never going to send American troops over for regime change wars. We're not going to be the world's policeman. And he opened the floodgates for conservatives to talk about and think about and pursue non-neocon foreign policy. It was liberating, because I do believe that there were many conservatives and folks on the right who had real misgivings, if not out and out anger, about our failed wars in Iraq, particularly those military families and certain pockets, red states, that had allowed their children to be used basically as pawns, and really bad strategy in both of those places, Iraq and Afghanistan. And had seen them deploy in and out of these places. People who are National Guardsmen who had been, deploying forever in and out of foreign countries. They were tired of these policies, but it wasn't until Trump came along and made it okay to question this. You're not going to be unpatriotic if you don't support this war, that war, going to Ukraine, and for these people in these magazines who had smeared Danny, they're acting as though he is so out of the mainstream as to be like some sort of allergen in the system that needed to be expunged. It's like, no, he's actually speaking for a lot of people in the conservative base, in the MAGA base, when he advocates us getting out of Syria, for example. That was another thing that they accused him. Oh, he's advocated getting U.S. troops out of Syria. Well, what are we doing there? He's advocated against not going to war in Iran. Well, not everybody wants to go to war in Iran. He questioned our tax dollars going to Israel so they can drop 2,000-pound bombs on children. Not everybody agrees with that. I mean, not everybody agrees that that's a good use of our tax dollars. So please, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I really feel like they've completely missed the boat. They want it to be 2002 all over again. We're talking about axis of evil when Trump has already made it okay to say some of the things. And that's what bothers me. I do think that Trump has tried to put in people in his administration who are more of a restraint voice, who are more realist, and they are contending now with that old guard, that old neocon guard. That's just kind of they don't want to release that grip, and all they know is smear tactics. And we saw this back in during the global war on terror, and they're doing it again. And you, like you said, Danny is like the latest victim of that. But we have to keep being loud and proud about this. We have turned a corner since that global war on terror. And I sure as hell not going back to the days where I have to be quiet. I never was quiet, but where I felt like I was outnumbered. We're not. There's a Washington establishment that's very powerful, very influential. They got a lot of money. They invest in a lot of think tanks and a lot of lobbying shops, and they want us to go to war with China and Iran and build up our military industrial complex. But I don't think the American people want that anymore. We do outnumber them.
Hey everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you're getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you're a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. What if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking? Use your website as a lead generation engine. What if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO Expert Search Engine Optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. You shared an interesting article the other day from Jacobin magazine, and that reminds me that there are still a handful of people on the left who are interested in making careful distinctions. Because for the most part, on the left, it's everybody's a Nazi. Now, maybe Jacobin feels that way, but they had an article about the civil war going on within Trump's foreign policy circle. So they're not all the same brand of Nazi, at least. So they're making this distinction. They're saying that there are some who advocate more foreign policy restraint. So again, this is more than you would get acknowledged by any, by Whoopi Goldberg, who thinks they're all the same. They're all Trumpians.
Yeah.
No, that's not an interesting thing to say. Much more interesting thing to say is that there are neocons in that circle who are very uncomfortable that Trump has gotten cozy with people who would, and the usual propaganda, shrink from America's leadership responsibility, whatever it is, all the crazy kind of way they talk. And that the Daniel Davis matter was simply a manifestation of this ongoing civil war. And so, of course, the big question is, in which way is that seesaw ultimately going to come to rest? Which side is going to be triumphant? There's an awful lot of money on the neocon side.
I wish I had an answer for you. I mean, if you had asked me several months ago when Trump won, I think I was part of a very optimistic coterie of people who really thought we at last had turned a corner, because there was this feeling that it was the realism and restraint faction of MAGA that really pushed things. And obviously, there are so many different reasons why Trump won the election, but there was this spirit that that there was this intellectual firmament that he could draw from, and that had been growing over the past 10 years or so, and that he was going to pluck these people. And J.D. Vance is right there at the top. I mean, J.D. Vance had vocalized from the start a skepticism of U.S. Foreign policy, and he had the bona fides of being a veteran who served in the Iraq War, came back with some really clear, sharp perspectives about the U.S. war strategy, the policy, and what went wrong, the idea that the United States could go and remake countries in its own name and sort of push its values out onto the rest of the world. That hadn't worked. And here was a guy, again, who had been there, done that, and now he was going to be the vice president of the United States. So there was a spirit that was a prevailing, that was the prevailing approach to foreign policy. And what Trump has done has created yet another mixed bag where he's incorporated many of those voices, or at least tried to, but tempered it with people who don't seem to either have a clear foreign policy view or are more traditionally hawkish or neocon. And so it's not altogether discernible what a Trump foreign policy doctrine would look like. It seems to be, one way for Ukraine, another for Israel, yet another for Latin America, yet another for Africa. We're already bombing Somalia again. So I couldn't answer you with any confidence that like one point of view is going to prevail over the other, or one faction is going to prevail over the other. I am hopeful that at least there are Republicans and conservatives who are out there and they're pressing and they're pushing, and they're offering clear alternatives to what we've seen over the last 30 years. And they're being smeared. But I do feel like there's more of them and we are not so dominated by neoconservatism as we were, say, 25 years ago. There's a real battle going on. I just don't know who's going to win it.
Yeah. That's the question. Now, I think Trump has genuine sympathies for the non-neocon faction, and I think what the non-neocon faction has, even if it doesn't have the money, is it has the popularity with the base. Right. Tucker Carlson is extremely popular, and Trump cares what he thinks. And when Tucker makes a statement on X, like here are the problems that would come from a war with Iran. That's a memo to Trump. Like there is no doubt in my mind, because when Pat Buchanan was writing some of his last newspaper columns, those were intended as memos to Trump. Because this is somebody who can be persuaded. That's the thing. It's precisely because he can be persuaded that people try to persuade him. And what I keep saying on this show is that I feel like if it were Don Jr., I'd have fewer headaches, because I would feel like I already know where he stands.
Exactly.
He's good 88% of the time, 90% of the time, but and I'll take my chances on the rest. But here it really is a matter of which person spoke to him last. But as I say, there's a lot of, it's true, there's a lot of Trump can do no wrong out there in that corner, in his corner. But surprisingly, there is a much, much larger group than you would have thought of people willing to say he got this one wrong, like the attack on Thomas Massie, which was absurd,
Yes.
which probably had an ulterior motive other than simply this obscure budgetary dispute. I think we can speculate on what that might be, but that response by people like a Matt Walsh, who has millions of followers, and many others saying, no, look, Massey's the real deal and he's a great guy and we shouldn't be attacking him. Those are some of the same people who are warning about don't keep going to war. And unfortunately, we have to kind of cross our fingers and hope that those memos get reached and take root in his brain.
Yeah, I mean, you made some great points about Tucker Carlson. He's been so consistent, and it worked before. I mean, when the first Trump administration assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the IRG, the Iranian general, top Iranian general in 2020, there was some retaliation for that. Obviously, it was very limited. I'm not denigrating the TBI or the traumatic brain injury that some of the soldiers on that outpost that was attacked had incurred, but it was limited in that there wasn't some multiple airstrikes over several days. It was sort of like, hey, you hit us, we're going to hit you back. And there was immediately a demand for Trump to hit them back hard. Now you have an excuse. Now you could take out their nuclear facilities. Now you could do the bunker busting bombs. And Tucker Carlson came out there and he's like, don't do this. You had, you made your point. You took out their top general. They did their limited response. You have a choice now. Do you want to go to war with Iran or not? I advise you don't. And he had Danny Davis on. He had Colonel McGregor on. I was even on, the one and only time that I was on Tucker Carlson. This is on Fox News. And he set up one conservative restrainer after another to say, Mr. Trump, this is not a good idea. And he did. And Trump listened. And Tucker has been consistent. Whatever you want to say about Tucker Carlson, he's been consistent on foreign policy restraint. And he has a very effective personal argument for the way he thinks on these issues. And it doesn't vary from country to country and conflict to conflict. He's one of the few people that have come out and say, it's not in our interest to keep fueling this war in Gaza with our bombs and our weapons. It's not. Tell me what the interest is. And that's very brave because he got killed for that. And advertisers supposedly were pulling out and conservative groups were like, you're not our man anymore. But he's like, hey, this is who I am. And and I don't pick and choose which conflicts I think that we should be supporting or not, and that we should just this isn't an a la carte situation. And I'm afraid there are a lot of people in Washington where it is a la carte on both the left and the right, but they see as a good war or a bad war or a moral intervention and an amoral one. That's Washington. And I'm grateful for every voice out there that remains so, because I feel like in these fraught times, people could turn on you on a dime because of partisan politics or personalities, or, they have a preferred country that they'd like to see, intervened in, or a government overthrown, and then and a lot of fickle friends, a lot of fair weather friends in Washington.
Hey folks, if you're a homeschooling parent, you're probably working too hard. The self-taught K-12 Ron Paul curriculum, to which I contributed hundreds of lessons on history and government, is the answer. For one thing, your students will actually learn, get this, that there are two sides to the argument at a time when their peers don't even realize there is an argument. But in addition to the standard subjects, we also teach what the state's ideological prison camps should teach, but don't, like how to run a home business, how to manage money, how to be an effective public speaker, and that's just for starters. Not to mention, if you sign up through my link, you get $160 worth of free bonuses that you won't get otherwise. So head over to my link, which is ronpaulhomeschool.com.
Again, this is another thing I've said recently, but I think I don't just think, I know he was pleased because he boasted about it when he heard that, I don't remember the exact details, but there was some area of the country where the demographics were such that Arab Americans were slightly going Trump. And he was very proud of that. And so there's a part of him, I think, that if he could figure out some way to come up with some grand deal that would satisfy both them and, obviously the Zionist side, he would do it. It's just that, everyone has kind of wanted to do that. The problem is it's very hard to come up with a solution like that.
I mean, okay, and that's such a sticky wicket there. But I feel like if he won in part by promoting an America First foreign policy, which he did, then he needs to stick to that. And I note that when he first announced we're talking about Trump here, he first announced his plan for Gaza, which would be to uproot 2 million Palestinians, move them somewhere, reconstruct the whole place to be a Riviera on the Mediterranean. And I remember there were plenty of people in the conservative and libertarian camp that were like, this is not what I voted for. This doesn't sound America First to me. What are you doing? You promised to do X, Y, Z in this country to get us out of wars. No more, these entangling alliances that are bringing us down the rabbit holes of violence and mayhem. What are you doing here? And I was heartened to see that, because, and it might be just my own timelines, on X, but there was a lot of pushback, and I think Trump needs to take note of that. Like, what is America First? What isn't America First? And I have to say, a lot of the things that we're doing overseas, particularly in the Middle East, doesn't seem too America First to me. It seems that we're doing the bidding of other countries. And he's great at going out to Europe and telling them to take more share of responsibility for their own defense. No free riding. We're not going to be Uncle Sucker. A lot of people agree with that. They're like, yeah, this is what we voted for. But he seems to have a different approach to Israel. And we know why. We know that some of his biggest donors come from a very hard pro-Israel perspective. But, he works for us, not them. And I do think a lot of his supporters are trying to remind him of that right now. They want Trump to succeed, but they also want to keep him to his commitments. And that was for America First policy. And it's not that hard. I mean, I say that facetiously, but, if you have a line, okay, and it's very realist, this isn't America First, this is not in the best interest of our country, then maybe we shouldn't be doing it.
Wouldn't it be nice if it were as obvious as that, and we and people would just hear that and it would be instantly intuitive and you wouldn't need to elaborate further? So, well, first of all, I did want to ask you, and I'm sorry I waited so long. Tell us about what the Center for, tell them about the Quincy Institute. Explain what we need to know about it.
Okay, so Quincy was basically founded in 2019 to do all the things that I've been promoting on this podcast for the last half hour. I mean, basically wanting to see a radical change in U.S. foreign policy, starting in Washington. For too long, the people who have promoted and supported more realism and restraint have been sidelined and marginalized. And we saw this at its apex during the global war on terror. And so we wanted to establish a real action tank, like a group of people with experts, both on subject matter, but also on communications and strategy, that could go toe-to-toe with the Washington blob, basically. We don't want to be doing the poking and shooting of arrows and whatnot from the outside. We want a seat at the table, and we want to actually change U.S. foreign policy root and branch. The Responsible Statecraft magazine is our publication. For too long, we've seen people, again, reporters, analysts, former government officials who want to write, and they want to write about foreign policy and national security, be sidelined and marginalized by mainstream media and magazine elite gatekeepers who have kept, that point of view and any alternate point of view out. So we created our own magazine to give all those voices a platform. And the best part of the Quincy is we're transpartisan. You might say, well, what the heck is transpartisan? It means that we need to harness the energy from the both left and the right to get any of this done. And so the same for the magazine. You're not going to get political talking points. You're not going to get partisan pablum. You're not going to get spoon-fed Democrat or Republican perspectives on any given foreign policy issue. We're just trying to inform people about what's going on in current events and Washington politics with an independent lens, fresh analysis, but all through a realism and restraint framing, which means no neocons, no warmongers, no war party, no blob. Which has been very successful because in the last 4 years that we've been up and running, and this is from a startup, we finally hit 1 million views a month. Well, to some that might not sound really huge, but for a small magazine that had maybe 70,000 views when I started in 2020, that's a big deal. What that tells me is that people are hungry for that kind of analysis. They're tired of Washington bubble speak and the echo chamber, which means we got great people. We got conservatives, we got libertarians, we got lefties, but the rule is you're speaking to the broader American audience. You're not speaking to just people you agree with or your particular ideological, tribe. No tribes. It's the only tribe is you don't want any more war for this country, and you don't want to send our men and women overseas for some political lark or adventure, or in particular for war profiteering, and that's a whole other conversation. The military-industrial complex.
I'm very bad when somebody asks me, what's your favorite book or your favorite movie? I can never narrow it down. I don't know the answer to those things. So you don't have to tell me absolutely the best in your opinion, but who would be a handful of people whose opinions on foreign policy you are always eager to seek and that the rest of us would be well advised to listen to also?
Well, I mean, I'm just going to throw out people that on current, the current issues of the day. I would say John Mearsheimer. I mean, I am just so grateful that we have somebody, and he's on the board of Quincy, by the way. So this isn't just a plug for him because he's on the board, not the board, but he's one of our fellows. But just because he's got a realist perspective that, again, is consistent. I'm a big sucker for consistency. I get it that people have their own opinions and perspectives, but I hate political waffling and putting the finger up to the wind. So I really appreciate people who are willing to have unpopular views, once in a while, because the political winds aren't with them, but they're out there sticking their neck out and their jaw. So I would definitely say Mearsheimer, I would say Jeffrey Sachs is out there saying a lot of great things. Again, people try to marginalize him. I'm sorry, but like, he's making a lot of sense. A lot of this is common sense for people, and they hear somebody like Jeffrey Sachs or Mearsheimer out there explaining the contours and the context of foreign policy and why we don't need to be in this war, or we shouldn't be fueling that war. And they say, well, that makes a lot of sense to me. So why are these other, nattering nabobs saying otherwise and making me feel like I'm unpatriotic or anti-Semitic for not agreeing? One of our founders, Andy Basevich, another guy who's has been writing for a very long time on these issues. He was one of the few out there calling alarms on the surge in Iraq and Afghanistan 20 years ago. And I mean, I became an acolyte of his, because I'm like, here's a guy who's a Vietnam veteran, a professor, Boston University, and he's out there saying, David Petraeus, you're not telling people the truth. David Petraeus, you're what's wrong with the U.S. war policy today and the politics in Washington. I said, oh my goodness. Everybody else was just going, oh, David, oh, counterinsurgency, oh, surge, and it's people like that who I feel like I am waiting to see what they're going to say next, because they've proven not only right, but they've had such integrity. And I guess that's what I put a real heavy, that's what means most to me is when somebody of integrity is willing to put their reputation on the line for their point of view.
I'd like to say, what would you most want to see happen if you had your ideal candidate as president in terms of foreign policy? But let's be more modest than that. What do you think is the best we could realistically expect from Trump based on things he's said or positions he's taken in the past? Like, what would you at least feel like you were at least satisfied with? You didn't get everything, but you got something.
Well, I do think that he will pursue the end of the Ukraine war. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know how quickly it's going to happen. Putin himself is not utterly predictable. So I do think that he is focused and committed to ending that war. I want to see it done in a way that obviously doesn't, is not so deferential to Russia that Ukraine is left super vulnerable and open to invasion again. I feel like we have some obligation to bring both sides to the table and create a situation where Ukraine is no longer destroyed, because right now it's on a bad trajectory. That Russia feels like it can be brought into some sort of European security architecture so that it doesn't have to lash out. That it feels that it's not like backed into a corner any longer. I feel like if Trump can pursue that, which is going to take a lot of commitment, a lot of diplomacy, a lot of time and energy, that would be very hopeful. I think that's been a festering wound, that relationship with Russia, for too long, and we saw what happened. On Israel and Gaza, I would love to see him take a step back and say, maybe aligning myself with Benjamin Netanyahu, who seems to be on a self-destructive course and is really just in this war at this point to save his own hide. Maybe I need to extricate from that toxic relationship and focus on what's best for my country. And maybe that means not giving Israel everything it wants so that it could do all the things that apparently does want, like annexing the West Bank and getting rid of all the Palestinians in Gaza. Like if at the very least Trump cuts off the spigots in some way, it doesn't even have to be aid, which I wish, but it could be just like not the support for Israel to do whatever it wants. That would be good. But I don't know how hopeful I am at this point. I think the jury is out on how committed he is to Israel, and whether or not at some point he might realize that what's happening is not good for us and that he has to shift course.
Yeah. What's been your assessment of Marco Rubio so far?
I don't know. I mean, I've never been a big fan of Marco Rubio.
No, who has? Like no one.
Yeah. He's when he started out, he was in the capture of the neoconservatives. So he became a creature of their foreign policy. And he mouthed their foreign policy. And he was a reliable vote on all of their measures and for supporting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and continuing for 20 years. And he never really wavered from that. And then when Trumpism became all the rage in 2016 and beyond, you started to see him shift and start mouthing all of the rhetoric of the new right and populism and national conservatism. And it never really came off as super authentic to me. But at the same time, that means that he seems to be less interested in military primacy and war out, overseas. So maybe that's a good thing. So, but again, he was nominated. I wasn't absolutely thrilled. He was confirmed. He's out there. He seems to be a reliable mouthpiece for whatever Trump is doing at any given moment. So, but people, it appears to me that people feel comfortable with Marco Rubio because he's a known quantity. He was a senator for so long. He has sort of like these establishment credibility. So he doesn't come off as crazy or unpredictable as some of these other picks, like a Kash Patel or Pam Bondi, where people like, where did they come from? They don't seem very qualified. Kristi Noem, like he seems like the most stable in terms of like his presentation. And so I don't know, Tom, I think he's just reflecting what Trump wants him to be. And as an observer of Washington foreign policy, I'm not sure I'm in entire agreement with what Trump is doing right now. So I guess I'm not in entire agreement with what Rubio is doing right now because of that. Like I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic, but I'm not part of the resistance either.
Yeah, no, understood. Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes am wondering, is he making foreign policy more with J.D. Vance than he is with his Secretary of State? Kind of like how Nixon and Kissinger, like nobody even remembers the Secretary of State under Richard Nixon. So
yeah, it is interesting. I see Steve Witkoff being given more responsibility and more airtime and profile than any of these other guys. And I'm wondering, okay, what is it about Steve Witkoff? I couldn't have picked Steve Witkoff out of a lineup, before, say, last month. And now it seems like he's the guy that's, he's the envoy, he's the Russia envoy. Keith Kellogg sort of got demoted. He's he's on the Ukraine side. But I don't feel like he's really the guy that Trump wants to be, enabling some of these meetings and conversations between Russia and U.S. I mean, at the same time, he's shuttling back to Qatar to engage in ceasefire talks with Israel and Hamas. So I'm like, who is Steve Witkoff? I mean, all I can think of is that he has the trust and confidence of Donald Trump. And that's not to say that Rubio doesn't have that same trust, or Vance, or any of these other guys. It's just I feel like Trump is, like you say, he even if it's unorthodox, he's going to go he's going to be working most closely with people he feels that are loyal to him. I don't know at this point if Steve Witkoff is an empty suit and he just had like a good deal when he brought about that Gaza ceasefire right after or right before inauguration. But hey, maybe he's the real deal. But you're right. I don't know if you're going to have the traditional relationships here, where that Rubio would be the representation of the president's foreign policy. I think it's going to be diffused and somewhat non-traditional.
Now, given the nature of what her position is, what are your hopes for what a successful tenure of Tulsi Gabbard might end up looking like?
I'm not sure. Like, I think what people had hoped for is that she would really shake things up in the intelligence community. And we know what was wrong with the intelligence community. It became insular and highly politicized and used in many ways and cases as a weapon, a political weapon, whether it be against Trump during the 2020 election, whether it's been to get us into wars. So I feel like the baseline hope is that she would be somebody from the outside who would come in, would be able to diagnose what the problems have been with the intelligence community and start literally breaking it apart and putting better people and practices in place so that it wouldn't be so insular, that the intelligence community could operate not in secrecy, but as a way to literally make our strategies for U.S. foreign policy and national security better and stronger and more reflective of reality. I honestly, Tom, I don't know if that's possible because of the deep state. I don't know what she's contending with inside, but those various intelligence agencies are pretty fully entrenched. They are highly politicized. They are highly socialized in regards to that they are territorial. And it's somewhat like the military-industrial complex. You can't just go in there and fix it in a day or even a term. And so I think she's got a lot to contend with, but then she's got all this outside pressure to also be reflecting a very mercurial Trump policy. I heard her being quoted about, how she foresees the call between Trump and Putin. And I'm wondering, well, is she just going to be another spokesperson for the White House? Or are they going to just let her kind of dig in and do what she's got to do? Plus all this stuff with Doge, I don't know. I honestly wish the best for her because I think she is one of the most authentic people that I've met in Washington in my time here, and so I only want the best for her, and I hope she's in the right role to do what she's got to do.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, even if the U.S. could be treated to briefings relating to intelligence matters that didn't sound like they were written for an 11-year-old. No, my 11-year-old is actually here in the room with me. I apologize. She would understand this, no problem. But you know what I mean? Like they would treat us like adults and not speak to us in slogans and propaganda. Even that would be an improvement. Even just the messaging would be an improvement. If we could hear something other than the predictable BS that we hear 24 hours a day, that would be something, because that would set our expectations such that maybe next time we might expect more truth-telling from official channels. I mean, again, not being treated like you're in third grade.
Yeah. I mean, I this is the problem with Washington. I feel, and everybody, there are so many people who hate what they're watching on the news today. They hate Doge. They hate the whole idea of the disruption that's going on in terms of the agency to agency firings and aid being slashed and programs being shut down. But I do think Americans should just take a step back and look and say, I had an understanding of how Washington operates that was unrealistic. What Trump is at least exposing is how massive this bureaucracy is, how insular it is, how territorial it is, that for many of these agencies, they no longer exist to do the original missions, which was, XYZ and helping the American people do this, that, or the other thing. It's just staying alive, meaning that they need to keep those budgets flowing. They need to keep that justify their roles. They have to keep their head down and not rock the boat, because if they do, they won't get those budgets. Their program won't be extended another year. So it's all about survival. And when you have that writ large over many, 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 many bureaus and agencies and programs, what you have is like this, and what they call it, it's a massive self-licking ice cream cone. The money goes in, it flows around, it benefits certain people, and who gets lost? The American taxpayer. And I think what he's been doing is just exposing Washington for what it is. Now, you might not like his tactics. He might not be doing it as methodically as people would have hoped. The downside is that he only has a certain amount of time to do this.
Yeah. And
to fix something like the intelligence community and the military industrial complex, it just the rot goes so deep, and it's going to take a long time. And you have some severely entrenched interests here, because it really is about money and power and influence. And it's not going to be easy to rip that root and branch. You might get rid of people, but the real problem is going to be very difficult to upend. So I would just say stay tuned on all that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have everything in the world against you, and it's an entrenched problem that you have to uproot with many, many people who have wormed their way into this thing, and who are hoping to bring about your failure, with everything they've got. So it is. I don't envy her or anybody else who might even remotely be trying to do the right thing in this situation. What's your website?
So it's responsiblestatecraft.org, all one word.
Okay.
And I would love for your readers and listeners to go there and check it out, because there is something for everybody.
Very nice. Well, I'll put the link, tomwoods.com/2622, which is our show notes page for today, also in the video description. So do check that out, and do follow Kelley, by the way. You can find her in all the usual places. I'll have links again on that page and beneath this video. So yeah, because she deserves to be followed. You will not say Woods steered me wrong at all. So,
well, I appreciate that. I'm a huge fan, have always been a huge fan.
Thank you.
I love your audience. We're all in this together. And so when I do say come to Responsible Statecraft, I mean, it is. And I need, like I said, we're trying to harness the energy from all over the spectrum, which means that I'm hoping what we offer on the website are reviews and analysis of foreign policy, rather, that is gonna animate, different segments. And we have a big libertarian audience, and I think that's just because, hey, none of us are interested in centralized power and how it's corrupted the military and our foreign policy. And I think you can see that across across the array of all of the intractable problems we have today.
Yeah,
in the
no
world.
doubt. Thanks so much, Kelley. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.